Today we are talking about cellular respiration. What is cellular respiration? In essence, cellular respiration is the process that cells undergo to turn food into energy. This is done via metabolizing the food that we eat into a molecule or substance we call pyruvate. So, food gets turned into energy. This energy unit, as we all know, is ATP. But then I also mentioned turning food into pyruvate. How do these two coexist? How does this concept connect? It will all make sense soon. Just bear with me for a bit. Let's work with an example. Rice. Rice is a food containing carbohydrate. It contains starch. Starch is a complex carbohydrate. This starch is turned into glucose. And then this glucose is further converted into pyruvate in a process called glycolysis. Why does pyruvate matter? You're going to ask. Well, pyruvate matters because, for all intents and purposes, pyruvate is an energy precursor. Pyruvate has many fates, but for our purposes, I'll only talk about two in anaerobic and aerobic cellular respiration. In aerobic respiration, it is when there is an abundance of oxygen. This is when there is air, basically. This is how our cells produce energy in the presence of a lot of oxygen. What happens to pyruvate then? Pyruvate, let me rewrite that. Pyruvate is turned into acetyl CoA. So wait, let's rewrite that properly. Pyruvate is turned into acetyl CoA upon entry into the mitochondrial complex. We all know what a mitochondria is. Acetyl CoA. Now, why does acetyl CoA matter? Why do we have to turn it into, well, acetyl CoA? Why can't we just use pyruvate? Because pyruvate can't be used in the citric acid cycle directly, or the Krebs cycle, as we call it. First, it must turn into acetyl CoA via the enzyme pyruvate. I cannot spell today for the life of me. Pyruvate dehydrogenase. This pyruvate dehydrogenase turns our pyruvate into acetyl CoA, and then acetyl CoA can then enter into the citric acid cycle or Krebs cycle, where it is further broken down to produce ATP, NADH, and FADH2. This will not be, like, the intricacies of this cycle will not be discussed in this video. Maybe I'll make a video on the Krebs cycle later down the line. But just know that pyruvate from your glucose turns into acetyl CoA via pyruvate dehydrogenase. And acetyl CoA enters the Krebs cycle, which makes ATP, NADH, FADH2, and other byproducts, carbon dioxide, water, etc., etc. Just know that the aerobic respiration, or Krebs cycle, creates the most amount of ATP per pyruvate molecule. Estimate at about 36 to 38. You're going to ask, why is it a range for the ATP? Well, because, again, there are different pathways that can happen, but that will not be discussed here today because that is far, far too complex. So we already discussed that aerobic respiration makes 36 to 38. So why do we need anaerobic respiration? Why do we undergo anaerobic respiration? Because remember, Glucose undergoes glycolysis, and then it becomes pyruvate. If I have forgotten to mention, then I will mention it here. One glucose molecule equals two pyruvate molecule. Now you're going to ask, why is anaerobic respiration even a thing? Well, that is because it occurs in conditions where oxygen is low, or or in cells that do not have a mitochondria. Because again, I mentioned earlier that pyruvate is turned into acetyl-CoA upon entry into the mitochondrial complex. The mitochondrial complex, or matrix. I learned matrix, but I used complex, so it might get a bit confusing, but mitochondrial matrix. Some cells, like your red blood cells, do not have a mitochondria. That is where anaerobic respiration comes in. Anaerobic respiration is when your pyruvate, why did I write there? Is when your pyruvate gets turned into lactic acid by an enzyme called lactate dehydrogenase. This occurs in the cell cytoplasm, where a molecule of NADH gets turned back into NAD+, which allows glycolysis to produce more ATP. Remember, okay, remember. Anaerobic, cytoplasm. Aerobic, mitochondria. Now that we've discussed that anaerobic respiration happens via cytoplasm, how much ATP is produced in anaerobic respiration? 2. It is that much worse than aerobic respiration. However, it remains necessary due to the simple fact that not all cells have a mitochondria that will allow for anaerobic respiration and the Krebs cycle. So let's do a final review. Final review. Aerobic respiration. This occurs in high oxygen environments where there is a mitochondria in the cell. Here, pyruvate is turned into acetyl-CoA by an enzyme called pyruvate dehydrogenase. Let's write it at the bottom here. Pyruvate dehydrogenase. Here you have the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain and all those other complex topics that will all make sense in due time. The aerobic respiration pathway produces 36 to 38 ATP. Then, let's talk about anaerobic respiration. Anaerobic respiration. Anaerobic respiration occurs in environments where there is low amounts of oxygen or the cell has no mitochondria. This is why the cell is called, the mitochondria is called the powerhouse of the cell, because it's where ATP is produced in abundance. This is where pyruvate turns into lactic acid via an enzyme called lactate This pathway produces 2 ATP. So that's about it for anaerobic and aerobic cellular respiration. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. See you.